than a dozen companies like Delta, United, and Hertz have cut partnerships with the NRA after the Florida school massacre. But FedEx won't be joining them. The company says it's, quote, a common carrier under federal law and therefore does not and will not deny service or discriminate against any legal entity regardless of their policy positions or political views, end quote. FedEx says its position on gun policy differs from the Rifle Association. It opposes assault rifles in the hands of civilians, but it's not taking away discounted rates like other big organizations who are responding positively to boycott calls. Kimberly, what do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting because now we're seeing a continuation of this story, right? And yesterday we talked about Delta, and then we talked about municipalities, state and local federal governments. What is their proper role in getting back involved, right? Because then we had Georgia getting upset because of the boycott against the NRA, so saying now we're going to take away your tax subsidies and your credits. We're getting into a little bit of a back and forth. It's getting a little tricky. Where does this stop? Where does it end? So that's... And then there's going to be public pressure on any different company now to say, well, look, FedEx did this. Look, this is what Delta did, and on and on. So where does it stop? I'm not really 100% sure about the role that companies should be having in a situation like this, public companies.
But, Jesse, I remember when a lot of Trump people did not like Shakespeare in the Park last summer. Remember the Julius Caesar presentation? You had companies like Bank of America, Delta, I think, they all said, you know what, we're pulling back a little bit. We're not necessarily associated with this, even though they were funding Shakespeare in the Park.
Yeah, some companies can't take the heat. Obviously, this company can. The CEO, Fred Smith's a great American. He served in Vietnam. He was a Marine, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart. He was actual roommates with George W. Bush at Yale. And the NRA, let's remember, didn't kill anybody. They didn't break any laws. And it wasn't the NRA that failed to protect school safety. That was the sheriff, and that was the FBI. There are 5 to 10 million NRA members, and they're mostly upstanding citizens. Remember, it was an NRA member that actually shot dead that shooter in Texas last year. So just because there's a few thousand activists bombarding these companies doesn't mean you have to cave to pressure. Businesses shouldn't discriminate against people because that they support an amendment or not. The ACLU supports the First Amendment, NRA supports Second, National Lawyers Guild supports the Fourth. That's fine. What is interesting is that there hasn't been a boycott of the NRA that was triggered by the Chicago situation. There's been almost 100 shootings in Chicago, victims, in the last 2 weeks, and no one said anything about that. That's just interesting to me.
Are you calling for one?
I'm not calling for any boycotts. I'm not a big fan of boycotts, but I am saying it's just suspicious when people use death in order to fulfill their political purposes.
Well, so what's interesting, Dana, to me is the larger concept here that our politics are so polarized, especially around an issue like guns, that you then see American corporations playing a role. They say, well, if everything's going to be tribal and divided, we're going to express our values very clearly. We're going to put them on the table. FedEx has done that, even in this situation. They may not be saying we're going to take away the discount rate, but you have companies like Delta, Symantec, Hertz, others saying these are our values. We think these are American values, and we don't agree with the NRA.
So I had a flight attendant reach out to me on Twitter, somebody that actually had been on one of our flights once, and she explained to me something about the United decision that I didn't know. And I still don't think that it's right to basically segment populations and identify financial benefit for one or the other based on partisan preferences. And I don't think that governments should punish companies for expressing their First Amendment right to decide to do whatever they want to do and who they want to give discounts to. What I didn't know is that one of United's captains, his daughter was killed in Florida, in Parkland. She was one of the 17. Her name was Gina Montalto. And that United Airlines, perhaps trying to have solidarity with that captain, had decided to made that decision. But all in all, I am not for different financial systems based on your partisan preferences. I think that is a terrible road to go down.
What do you think about when the big companies punish, like Rush Limbaugh or somebody for saying something they consider to be obnoxious? The other day in Boston, I think it's WEEI, several companies pulled away because they were saying bad stuff about Tom Brady's agent, who's Asian.
I am often suspicious about companies acting on so-called values. I think it's more about fear. And the fear is based on the effective social networks in which their numerical significance is exaggerated. 100 people, and we know this with the Russian bots, 100 people can feel like 1,000, can feel like 10,000. So we see a lot of companies folding to that, and they fold, I think they fold prematurely. Because what happens is, what I've noticed on Twitter, there are people who will say, I will never use Virgin American again. Until, of course, Virgin American is the only flight out of Aruba.
Right.
And then they change their mind. So a lot of these boycotts are part of an initial onslaught from a couch. There's a lot you can do. If you really are upset about this, you can. You can offer actual solutions. You can call your congressman, your senator, you can do things, and you can talk to people and think hard about this stuff and think about real solutions rather than getting mad at a company which is basically just people doing their jobs. If you are more mad at FedEx than you are at the Broward sheriff, that's false concern.
Yes.
You're choosing the company purely as a virtue signal to say, look at me, look how moral I am. But it's clear that the failure lies with the sheriff, not with Federal Express. And I think more companies should listen to, should follow in FedEx's footsteps, withstand the initial onslaught, and hopefully people will realize there are better things to do.
All right, good
All right.
example.
Ahead, since when is it a controversy to offer prayers for someone who's ill?
Oh my gosh.
There's a backlash against actor Chris Pratt for doing just that.
Can you even believe
Next.
it?